Review of the game. Does anybody remember the review of the game? Does anybody... Okay, who's played it? Who in chat played Halo 3 ODST? Yeah, I played it. I played it.
I played the video game?
I had friends with me. That almost made it fun. Except my friends are really good at shooting, so sometimes I didn't get to fire a shot on some levels. I completed entire levels without getting to fire a bullet because everything on the level was dead before I could see it. And we weren't playing on easy or normal.
We were playing on... Were we on Legendary?
We were on Legendary. Yeah.
Yeah.
We started not on Legendary, and then after the first couple levels, we were like, let's turn that up. And then there was one point on Legendary where we cleared a level that was, I think, 10 minutes of, like, you know, talking back and forth and whatnot as we walk through this city. 4 people walking through this city together in the dark. 3 enemies spawned.
That means one person doesn't get to shoot?
Even if we section off and split up 1 enemy per person, 1 person still doesn't get to shoot an enemy in that whole stretch. What?
It was a video game? Maybe?
Oh, like... I think part of their level design pipe was broken. That's my only explanation. Because somewhere around the end, the levels just stopped being designed. Like they got walls.
You can kind of see what they were doing.
Yeah.
Or what they were trying to do. They were trying to give you this window into like what it looks like as somebody who isn't the Master Chief in the Halo universe. And that could be very interesting because, you know, the Master Chief wasn't the only member of the Spartan program. But what they actually did is made you very, very uninteresting. And then they took all the characters around you, and none of those were Master Chief either. And they were all also very, very uninteresting. And then they put you somewhere where the Master Chief may have been at some point, and well, that's not very interesting.
Mm-hmm. They Fallout 3 and 4'd it. They made an interesting story, and then they made you some guy just learning about that story.
As opposed to what is one of the core tenets of video game design, is let the players play the story. Like that's why you play a video game, right? To be the interesting characters.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody in the chat, I'm sure at least some people in the chat played Fallout 3 and 4, but if you remember in those, you're like Fallout 4, I know you're following your dad. I don't remember Fallout 3. I remember somebody telling me it was the same, but I mostly blanked Fallout 3 out of my mind. All I really remember about Fallout 3 is slow motion heads exploding. That's the only thing that kept me playing that game.
Also abusing VATS, because VATS was very easy to abuse in that game.
Well, that's how you get the slow motion head explodes, with VATS.
Yep.
So yeah. VATS was an interesting design, but we'll do another. We could do a whole show on VATS. But no.
I don't know about a whole show. VATS plus some other like Halo 1 and 2 systems.
Ooh, comparing it to the original system?
Halo 1 and 2, Fallout 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Comparing it to the original could be fun. Okay, back to ODST. We got to talk about this game, not interesting games. But yeah, right, that's how the comparison started, was following the father. I'm one of those voyeurs, I've watched more games than played. Okay.
Totally fine.
Yeah. I open to those types of opinions. I actually want those opinions because I've played so many games, I can't create that opinion myself. I never could. I could never say that I've watched more games than I played. If I spent the rest of my life watching games, I don't think I could catch up.
Yeah, it'd be tough. Although there are some games that I have only played for like very short spurts, but really enjoyed watching. Like the first Last of Us. Cannot stand playing that game. Made a great movie.
Yeah, I should watch it sometime. But it's just been done so many times. We see the mistake so many times. And you do get to play the story sometimes in Halo 3. Like, it's half and half, right? You play the story, you do the story section.
In 3 itself, you play the whole story. But in ODST, you're just somebody else learning about the story, and because you're learning about it, you know that there's no impact that you can have because it's already happened, so it literally doesn't matter.
But it still does sections where we had like more interesting action and we were different players, and I remember us being like, hey, this part's fun.
When they gave us enemies to shoot, it was a pretty competent Halo game.
Yeah, but it was just those, I don't know, I think they wanted to deliver story, but all it did was destroy pacing. And pacing is super important in a shooter game.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even Doom 2016, more than Doom Eternal, nailed the delivery of story and the action. Like those two things going hand in hand. They really, really nailed that. Eternal, I found they spent a little bit too much time just pulling you out of the action to be like, here, story, take it. Still a really good game. Still my favorite shooter, but
Halo 3 ODST. We've done multiple shows on Doom. We could do more. Hello, Cuddles. Welcome. Do you know Halo 3 ODST?
We probably should do more on Doom Eternal. We just need to play the DLC.
Yes.
Which means I need to get time to play the DLC.
Hey, Pseudo, welcome.
Oh, hey. Welcome. Now let's see if we can get audio going.
He'll figure out his mic in a minute. He'll get that there going there soon there, eh? All right.
Had the gain turned down.
There we go. Hey, welcome, Pseudo. In the middle of a move-in, we're glad you can join us. We've started talking about Halo 3 ODST. We started with a little spiel of OBS Ninja and gushed over that for a bit because it's cool and people need to know about it.
And then we brought up one thing about Halo 3 ODST and then talked about Fallout for a little bit. And then we brought up another thing about Halo 3 ODST and then talked about Doom for a little bit.
Yes. We've been very successful at staying on. Yeah, but it's been very, very successful with staying on track. But we started talking about, like in Halo 3 ODST, you're not playing the story. Like the story's already established. You're just following the story.
Are you even playing? He was walking.
Getting slapped by wet meat.
That sound effect was amazing.
It was so pronounced. It was just louder than everything else. It was louder than like dialogue and stuff. And I don't know if it just glitched or something, but there was no music, so all I heard was like everywhere we go. And I was like, what? I thought it was rain. It sounds like raindrops too. It's like, where's the rain? And then I noticed that it was playing.
Oh God, is my home leaking?
Yeah. I've got a fair bit to say about ODST as well. So I do agree. You know, let the player play the story. There's a lot.
What do we think?
Sorry.
What do we think they were actually trying to accomplish with those sections?
My understanding was they were trying to, you know, have the feel of like all this stuff happened there before, and then now like the retrospective journey of, you know, the last survivor walking through and recounting his memories, right? Which is a trope, and it can be done fairly well. It's just
doesn't work well in a 4-player game.
Yeah, it doesn't not for this. They had too much story for the co-op it would have been, and it should have. It tried to go really deep, and I don't know of any like 4-player co-op games that can really be too serious, because if you're playing with a bunch of people, chances are you're going to be kind of screwing around a lot. There's going to be jokes being made. That's why games like Borderlands are so fun, because they don't take themselves seriously. It is just with a group of friends, you're going to have a laugh and have a good time. And you'll see the same thing with like Left 4 Dead. Doesn't take itself too seriously. Like, yeah, it's kind of a story, but it's not really the point of it. The point of it's hanging out with with people and the social aspect of that.
Yeah, one of the greatest insults I ever heard in my life came out of playing Halo 2 multiplayer. That's what playing with your friends is. It's telling each other off. And I don't even think I could say the insult on stream.
Probably not. I think I know what you're talking about.
It's that
it's pretty
good.
rude.
It's that good. It really is. And I've used it on people since then. And every time you use it, the person goes, like it's that good.
So ODST I found is one of those games that tried to dip its toes in too many lakes, and just didn't do any of them right. It tries to do the co-op missions, like it's similar to the older Halos did. They try to have that deep, serious storyline regarding war, and they also try to have the comedic humor in the writing, and all of it kind of just fell flat. And if they just pulled in any one of those directions, committed any of those directions, I feel like that game would have been a lot better. Like if it could have been a serious game. It would have had to been a lot harder, and it would have had to been a lot darker, which may not have fit with the kind of the theme of or the game of what Halo players would have expected at the time. But it could have been done. They could have had it where, since you're not playing Spartans, you're really just kind of weak. They could have had it where these things are very, very tough, and you really have to work together to take them down, or you really have to use strategy and tools, and make it more on the ends of like a thriller or horror game where you're fighting like big enemies rather than just kind of like a wave of things that kind of just die in one shot, and you're not really that different from the Spartans.
You're already not Halo there, though, right? Like,
yeah, and then so if they wanted to go non-Halo, because like ODST is already like not Halo, it just is this weird kind of black sheep that got created. It's still close to the thing, but if they wanted to make it different, they should have committed to making it different and really like and went full that way, not just kind of half and half of each.
It's a really interesting way to look at it, and you're kind of right. And it's such a reverse logic design decision that you can understand why it's not going to work. But essentially what ODST is, it's an attempt to make a Halo game that's not like Halo. Yeah.
It was like the first, I believe it was like one of those like open world elements where, like, we're not going to guide you. You're just going to have to walk. And, they just, if they were to do that, they really should have just made it like open world and not, because it's still linear story missions. You just, don't have a direct linear path anymore.
I think they could have made the game better as one player.
Yeah.
On that design.
Yeah. I think 4-player, it should have been the traditional, you're kind of ubermenches and you just want to, fight stuff. And maybe not have the story jump around so much. You can still have characters and get involved with them. One thing that I think if they wanted to make Halo different, which I think they started doing in the later series, if they wanted to have a co-op game, is to implement classes and implement roles. Have someone who does more damage, have someone that can take damage, and have someone that can heal. That Holy Trinity kind of aspect. Have people get involved in the team aspect rather than just one of us goes one way, the other one goes of us one way, and eventually someone will find enemies and we'll run over, and you're kind of just walking around into the.
There's not even any running over. It's just I found enemies. Oh, lucky.
yeah, that was our experience at the game.
But these design decisions are all great for a single player game. That dark, not your single player game, but as a single player design, they're perfectly fine. They could make a great game out of these design decisions for some people. The exploring, the dark interflexion. I will agree with
that. They're perfectly fine. I will agree with that.
If if those pieces are done super well, you can still make a great game. If the writing is top notch and the interflexion makes you actually analyze your decisions as you're walking through this like battlefield of tragic and seeing the leftover remnants of what happened, you know, like this War of Mine or something like that. Basically what they were trying to go for, but it doesn't work well in 4-player. It's just not serious enough. You can't make it that serious, like Sudo was saying. And the biggest selling point of this game for most people that I know, they're like, oh, 4-player campaign, yeah! Sell on that. Just do a Halo campaign that's silly. Give us all a bunch of power. Like maybe some of us are Master Chief and some of us can be the alien dude if we want to. Give us a choice, because that's what people want, and then just like spawn vehicles. Like, here's a vehicle. A person drove away in it. Damn, he got it. Pff, another one appears there. Yay, I get one too. That would have been great. That's all you need. Just let us play and blow stuff up. That's all I wanted.
Yeah, like they went ODST, so they went like you know, kind of there's so many other aspects of the Halo universe they could have went with. Like they could have focused maybe more on the flood. You know, that could have been a fun co-op thing. You know, you're clear flood infected areas, you're clearing out flood, you know, that a bunch of weak units with people, you know, you don't have to have full Spartans, then you can still have, you know, human Marines and stuff like that if they wanted to go, you know, the grittier kind of route, maybe not just everyone be Spartans. Or like there's a bunch of directions you can with it, but it just overall it felt also was weird being those Marines are so used to not really doing too much, and I get they were special forces, but like none of the enemies really, you know, there's not really a point where you're really given too much trouble, and I get that's kind of common for Halo, but if they wanted to change this up and have you not be a genetically super like super soldier all the time, like it would have been nice to have some sort of like maybe start implementing some bosses or something, or have some sort of, you know, different mechanics rather than just like you're clicking on heads and they just kind of go down and you just keep clicking on heads. The parts of the game I didn't mind too much. I did like the defending parts because, you know, there was stuff to do. Yeah. You know, you could actually like shoot things, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe if there was more of that, like if it was open world and, you know, maybe if it was objective based and not just
that's exactly what I was going to.
If it was like an actual war, right? Like, oh, you have to take this objective, similar to, you know, maybe how like, you know, the Battlefield series is, where it's like there's take an objective. If your people are on it, you know, you take it and you move forward and you can go through it like that way. And maybe you're just trying to like take over these things. But when you do that sense, it gets too hard to be the story. But if you're doing like a big multiplayer campaign thing, the story is going to be hard to do anyways, because there's going to be too many people, you know, interpreting different things at once. People aren't taking it seriously. You're going to try to take it seriously, but you can't really take it as seriously, or you can't take it seriously if everyone else in your group is, you know, talking over you, or, you know, just mucking around. So you're kind of, you can't always predict, and you also can't count on that being the case. Like, there's certain games where you can kind of do that, like Man of Medan and stuff like that, because they have serious tones, but they're designed in a way where, you know, control is a bit limited. You know, there's not so much the player can really do all the time, and that's where those things work. But if a player has full control and you're trying to be serious, it's not going to work, because the narrative is in the control of the player. And if you're really trying to set that tone, it's up to the player to move forward, and they can just start, you know, mucking around, and right then the immersion can get broken.
Even if we don't change any of the design of the gameplay in ODST, because if you remember, there was those blank parts that are vivid in our mind, and then there was those little brief interludes of like fun action where all of us were running around blowing stuff up and shooting things and actually getting to do stuff. And then there was back to the dull part. If we literally just cut the dull parts out, and we don't have to do those, and the whole game is just those action segments put one after another, I had fun.
Yeah. AKA, if they had just let us play the story rather than be some asshole walking around trying to figure out the story.
And like, if I remember correctly, ODST wasn't as large of a game as the typical Halo series, and it was sold fairly cheaper. It's not so much an excuse to like why things are done, because if it was going to be improved, we're going to assume that, you know, full resources would go into it. But what I would have loved to see is just a separate single player and co-op campaign. You know, if you wanted to have that deep story and have all that theming and stuff, you can still put that in a single player campaign and have it paced that way.
Yep.
But then still have a separate one for co-op where you're just playing as, you know, maybe just no-name Marines, or maybe you can even make your own characters and kind of explore a side story. Then maybe you still run into the main character here and there, and you can interact with them as they're an NPC or something. You know, maybe tie in two stories that way. but just kind of ham-fisting the single player experience as co-op just kind of gets weird.
It didn't play well as co-op. If they literally didn't make any extra for the multiplayer and just cut out those boring parts and just let us play the action segments back to back as a multiplayer experience, I think that would have been fine.
Yeah. It was already immersion breaking enough, so like there's no point, we could have just had the action parts. I got to make sure my garage is closed real quick. I'll be right back.
All right.
Kind of important. Firefight is what they were selling. That's one of the multiplayer modes, the competitive multiplayer, right? Yes, no, maybe so.
I don't know what it is, but I know a lot, like a massive chunk of the Halo market is the campaign, like a massive chunk. And this was the first game to do 4-player. Probably. This was the first game to do 4-player campaign.
Yeah, and I was definitely one of those co-op campaign gamers myself. Like I have no interest in Halo multiplayer, but I would say it's probably a third, somewhere around there, that are the campaign focused gamers, because the multiplayer is it really is what has given Halo its staying power. If it weren't for the multiplayer, I really think that Halo would have stopped after 3.
Firefight is a co-op wave shooter. So it sounds like their version of COD Zombies.
Yeah, it's like the horde shooter, wave based, which like they're fine and stuff like that. But like for a lot of people, they want objectives still, right? Those games kind of you just play until you fail, which are fine, but not for always everybody. Not everyone wants to. Sometimes you want to have that win condition, right? And I think Zombies ended up adding win conditions eventually. I'm not sure if Firefight had win conditions or not, but yeah, I don't know. The co-op campaign just felt weird because it was kind of like you could tell it wasn't an afterthought, but there wasn't a whole lot of the effort put into it.
Yeah, I'm seeing the campaign as the biggest selling feature of this game, being 4-player. Not that it's going to be a great campaign, and I'm expecting a lot from it, because like you said, it's cheap, but I am expecting to shoot something.
To have some Halo gameplay.
Yeah, I think some enemy forces being left behind and surprising us in those long walking sections would have been lovely.
And I mean, every once in a while there was an enemy or 3, but then they would spawn on either me or Pseudo, and then they would all be dead before anybody else got there.
Well, it's not like they spawned a lot on you guys, and you're spawning like grunts and stuff where it's like, yay, yay, yay. And I mean, it's not like we're going to be able to take it seriously when there's confetti and cheers happening every time we shoot an enemy in the head.
Although, to be fair, that was on us. That is on us.
They're the ones who put it in the game.
Yeah. But even then, like, the pacing of it was weird because you kind of fall down. Everything's so dark and quiet that you're expecting a more of like a horror or thriller experience, right? Where like, oh, I should be, taking my time, being careful. If they wanted to have it that way, maybe what it should have done was like, maybe they have roaming patrols of very strong units that, you're supposed to lay traps for an ambush or something. Or if they surprise you, then, it's an actual fight and maybe they do like significant damage. But it was kind of just, you just wander the streets without much going on and not very like eventful. And when you do run enemies, they're easy to kill. So you're not really like, nothing's at stake. You can have emptiness in games, but they're usually, like I said, in more of the horror and thriller types because it's that suspense of like what's going to happen next, what's coming. That kind of keeps you drawn in and entertained rather than just like paying attention to like meat slapping footsteps until the next grunt shows up that you headshot.
Keep in mind
the audio bugs were amazing.
Keep in mind, everyone, that we are talking about an experience on a very high difficulty. We're not playing on easy. We're not talking about it being on easy when we're rocking around, encountering 2 or 3 enemies and killing them in a few seconds. That's supposed to be what the game can offer for difficulty. This is expecting something from it, expecting to die a couple times. Would you play Halo Wars if I submitted it? I'd play it. Do you think I'll finish it?
Halo was that their RTS?
The RTS, right? I played that and it was weird. I don't remember like absolutely hating it, but it also was not like it wasn't too much of a memorable RTS to me. But I don't know. I think I played on a console, and playing RTSs on console was just like a very weird experience.
I think it was only on console, wasn't it?
You didn't love playing Brood War on N64 with the most ergonomic controller ever?
It's only a mission game. I don't know. If you think if you think it's a good game and people would enjoy it, and I'm going to like it, then submit it. If I don't like it, I'll stop playing it.
It was pretty neat. Like I like the idea of it. Like it had a lot of potential, and I think if it has a campaign, I remember that being okay. It's just I remember there was cheese strats when it first came out because you get the elephants and you can spawn Spartans out of them, and I just remember like parking that like halfway through the map and just like continuously spawning one and sending it in as like permanent harassment, and that just seemed to work.
That just wins.
Yeah, it was just like they just kept going one after another. I would just send them in, and eventually I had a big enough army with other stuff to just kind of take them over. And I was like, but I'm also like, I wasn't playing any like actual difficult or anything like that. It was just like once I find a cheese strat in a game, it's really hard for me just to not to use it. And then depending on the game, I'll probably end up getting, I'll just not
finish at that point.
Yeah, I tend to lose interest in games after I find a great little cheese strat too. Like, I played Halo 4 until I was able to shoot people 99% chance through a wall in the head from 3 blocks away, and I was like, yeah, I've done enough of this.
Fallout 4.
Fallout 4. What did I say?
Halo.
Oh, yeah. Fallout 4.
I haven't
played Halo 4 yet. Yeah, I didn't beat it either. It bugged out on me. Halo 4 will be later tonight, though.
I wrecked Fallout 4 for myself. I think I explained this before in stream. I went ahead and just explored because that's typically how I kind of play those games. And we talked about before, like the Padia style, similar to Skyrim, where you just kind of roam and do whatever. But in Fallout 4, when you clear out a building of enemies, they don't respawn. So I went and cleared out like a bunch of towns, a bunch of bandits, and all this other stuff. And then I'm like, oh, I'll start doing some quests. And the quests are like, oh, my bandit stole my heirloom, and it's in this building. And I go there, and I'm all ready to like have some action, and it's just empty. I'm like, oh yeah, I killed these guys. I just like walked through and grabbed the item and left. And that happened like 4 or 5 times in a row because I just happened to kill everyone that was part of these quests. And I'm like, and it was fine. I'm like, I appreciate it. I guess they don't just magically respawn, but at the same time, it was like, oh, I kind of like broke these quests for me. Oops. And then it got kind of weird, and I'm like, it started to lose interest. I was really enjoying the game until I started to lose interest because I'm like, all right, and then the quests are just insanely tedious now. They're already tedious because they're fetch quests, but now they're like fetch quests without any conflict. You're just going and
just literally go get this thing.
Yeah, and then so started going back to something else. Maybe finish it someday, but I thought it was always kind of funny and like getting ready to throw down, and I didn't click to me right away too. I thought the game bugged. I'm like, where is everybody? Like, what's going on? All this stuff's empty, and I'm like, clued in my head, like, oh yeah, I killed these guys like last week.
Games on a service, live service games, WoW and Borderlands 3. I understand WoW. I don't understand Borderlands 3.
I wouldn't really call either of those games as a service, honestly.
Yeah, neither would I.
But
that's WoW is a subscription-based game. But they do offer a server service.
I think they mean always online, like always online games. I don't know if Borderlands 3 is always online.
Yeah, Borderlands 3 you can be offline
Borderlands
and play.
3 can be played offline.
Because if like always online games for multiplayer, I mean, it makes sense because they're multiplayer. But like SimCity being always online was kind of bullshit.
Yeah, that's unnecessary. But something like WoW being always online, that just makes sense.
And any multiplayer MMO game, if there's no single player. But then I'm not sure if you mean, I'm not sure live service games.
But on the topic of games as a service, in general, I find that, speaking about games like Anthem, it is designed in such a way to keep you playing with the minimum amount of effort put into the game. I would describe Destiny 2, for instance, as games as a service game. in that they're trying to sell you a new season pass every couple months. They're trying to sell you new DLC every couple months. They want you to spend money at their real money shop. They end up, because they have to incentivize their DLC so hard, they end up being quite empty more often than not. One could make an argument for what's the Diablo 2 like ARPG?
Path
You
of
play
Exile.
it all the time, Deus. Yeah, Path of Exile.
Great game.
That is also a games as a service game, but done right. The core free game is actually really good. Like it's a really good video game. And then they just give you the option to participate in stuff like seasons, downloadable aesthetic pieces.
No, there's no seasons.
No, there definitely is seasons. You just don't have to pay for them.
Oh yeah, well they just have like things happening, and then if people like the event is more of what it is than a season, then they include the effect later on, and it becomes a part of the game. But it's just introducing new mechanics, not stuff you have to earn by playing and whatnot.
Yeah. But like a game like that has absolutely done it right. They deserve all of the money that they get through their microtransactions because they make good content and say, if you like what we're doing, throw us a little bit of money.
All of the microtransactions in the game are cosmetic or just increasing your stash inventory. There's no effect on actual gameplay power.
To touch on Board's comment there about Fallout 76 having a big enough player base for Bethesda to continue making money, they don't have a big enough player base. They just have a juicy enough player base. It's kind of like quality over quantity. The few people who really enjoy Fallout 76 really enjoy it, and they tend to pour in quite a bit of money. That's the thing you'll find with a lot of the games that kind of get pretty egregious with microtransactions, and they're not always trying to go to everybody. They're just trying to find, the whales, that they say, the people that will spend ridiculous amounts of money. There's those, you'd be surprised at how much people actually spend in some of these games, because they don't stop you. There's no one, the game is, going to let you spend as much as you want. No one's ever going to stop you depending on, how much money you have. And since it's credit cards, unfortunately, some people go into some pretty heavy debts. I've known people personally that have spent in the thousands and upwards of, getting pretty close to like tens of thousands, as well as heard stories of people who work in the industry who they're like, yeah, some of our top people are spending like 60 to, even six figures worth in our game. And you think about the quality of some of these games and stuff like that. And like, is it really worth that? And like the people spending it, of course, like, yeah, it is. But like, when you think about like how much money is going into that, and it's like the reason they're spending it too, some of these times, especially when we had that loot crates and the loot crate era, it wasn't so much of a content. You're basically just trying to gamble to get the stuff you want. And some of the games would hide content behind that. And the only way to get, your favorite character in the game was to, keep buying loot crates, and you don't know the rarity of them, right? They'll keep saying like, oh, they're common. Oh, everyone else has them online. And then next thing you know, you spent a couple $100 to get something.
Yep.
Especially if you start getting into the whole gotcha game craze. Well, I say craze. It's been a thing in Japan for decades.
We should probably.
But you don't even get a whole character. You get a piece of a character, and now you need to keep rolling to get more in order to get the other pieces so you can put your character together. But now it's level 1, so now you need to keep rolling to get more so that you can level up your character efficiently.
So let's be happy that ODST doesn't have microtransactions.
Yes.
Thanks for not doing that.
Yes. 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 Thumbs up to Halo 3 ODST for no microtransactions. But let's go back to Halo 3 ODST if we can. Is there even anything more we can say about the game?
There's a bunch of
the game is so empty it's hard to talk about.
Could float about, right? Because like with it being empty, this means there's also room for improvement. Like I really would have liked that class system. It definitely would have been weird for the Halo series, but it was already like a weird entry, like I wouldn't have mind some sort of medic role, or actually being able to choose a loadout and maybe have some sort of customization, or maybe have some sort of mastery where you can actually level up and there's some purpose. Make it open. If it's going to be open world, you have to add some sort of reason to explore. You find new items to add, find upgrades, find skill points, find something. We walked around and found nothing, literally nothing. Maybe a shotgun that I used for like one shot, and then it was a cutscene, and then I got a new loadout automatically given to me.
Okay, that's an interesting take. Let's approach this. Let's make it a little. We'll come to an agreement here on our approach. Let's not remove the big boring sections. Let's try to keep the talk going on in the background of them. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole retrospective
we're
side.
doing story exposition.
And keep it interesting for 4 players.
I think Pseudo really hit the nail on the head with the whole roving death squad idea, where you've got these big bad enemies that straight up are more badass than you. And you've got to either avoid or find some other way to deal with them.
Awful McBad says the best segments of it were when you were sneaking around at night trying to avoid enemies because you're not the Master Chief, but we never actually experienced that when we played the game. Actually, in those sections where it's the 4 of us playing together at night, we split up and ran around looking for the enemies. And whenever somebody found enemies... But it's supposed to be a multiplayer campaign, right?
Yeah.
So we played it multiplayer, and even though we played it on a high difficulty, we played it on a high difficulty as well. I think we were on Legendary, but it was like even when we encountered enemies, it was just headshot, 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 headshot. Hey, they're all dead. And there was literally times where we completed a level and some people didn't get to fire a shot.
Yeah, like the big thing is you're between the single player and the multiplayer, you're just playing like a cloned version of the single player experience with just 4 people. So now like maybe they added more enemies. I couldn't tell. But they gave you no reason to actually cooperate. You were just experiencing single player with 3 other people. That's kind of what I was saying about the roving death squads and maybe some class thing is like you have a reason to do it. Like maybe someone out there is going to be laying traps. Maybe you have a sniper up in the tower or up on a cliff somewhere, ready to pick people off. Maybe you have some sort of coordination, some sort of reason to actually work together, because we didn't. We just roamed around, and some of us would get kills and some of us wouldn't. Or, maybe you have to... Like, there's a lot of mechanics that are in toolkits that are in existing co-op games that, could have been used to this, but they just took the single-player experience and then said, all right, we take Rookie and just have them mirror 3 times, and all of a sudden there's 3 of them for some reason, and now the story doesn't make sense because you keep saying, oh, you're here by yourself, and there's 4 of us just standing there being like, yes, we are we are Borg. But it's, like I said, like what I would like to see, especially story-wise, is maybe you get stuck behind enemy lines. Maybe something goes, you're supposed to land somewhere, and for whatever reason you get blown off course and you land in this city completely filled with Covenant, and you have to be careful, because if you alert them, they'll all come and take you out, and you're just 4 people and they're an entire army. And that could have been a whole neat thing, right? You trying to fight back to get to your squads and your teammates to fight out of this infested area. There's a lot of potential they actually had with this. It was just duplicating the single player, making it co-op is it wasn't okay, but I mean, there's just the potential there. And I guess Firefight could have been fine, but I would have, if it was to be remade now, the potential it had to really have a gritty Halo experience where you don't feel like a badass all the time and you really have to be careful with what you have and you really kind of have to manage your resources would have been really cool.
That would have been awesome.
Judging a single-player experience based off of an optional co-op experience is unfair to the game. Don't make a single-player experience and then make it the very first game to offer 4-player multiplayer campaign.
Yeah, and I mean, Halo Combat Evolves co-op, you're all the Master Chief, and it feels 100% different than single player. I strongly disagree.
No, it's still the same. Like, it's same with like Halo 3. You can still play that, I believe, in 4-player co-op, and it's still slightly easier, but it's still challenging.
I did play solo Legendary,
and the experience. I've beaten them all on solo Legendary as well. Like, it's like, you can check my Steam. Like, it's fine. the thing is that you can say it's unfair to compare it, but it's unfair to make it that way in the first place. Why just clone the single player experience to have multiplayer as an afterthought? If you wanted to make a multiplayer experience, it's a completely different avenue of game design. It wasn't designed. It was just copied and cloned.
Yeah,
just to slap a feature
offer
in.
it and advertise it if you're not going to design the game to be played that way.
And like, and stuff happens like this too, and like it gets made. And I'm not gonna, say like ODST. I don't think was a full priced release, and I, appreciate what they were trying to do. We're looking at ways that these things could have improved because, future generations and future game designers and people making things, they can look at the same avenue of like, okay, we have a single player experience, and now we want a co-op one, and we can all retrospectively look back and say, you know what, I could just make the single player experience multiplayer and put that in. But is it really worth it? If I want to do multiplayer, should we take the resources and make a full-fledged multiplayer campaign, or should we take the resources and really enhance its single-player campaign? Because if you split your resources that way, what you find out ends up happening is you kind of get a half-baked version of both. And a lot of the times, it would have just been better to have like a killer single-player experience with a lot of features, or really focus those resources on multiplayer rather than just kind of splitting things up and not really having anything too unique.
Yeah, and as we've said, there are
the Borderlands series comes at it from the opposite side of being primarily multiplayer focused. And if you try and play those games single player, they suck. They feel empty.
No fun. I'm with you. I can't play them single player, but Halo 3 ODST did do some things well, I agree, and there's times where you're like, you can see what they're trying to do. It just doesn't play well the way they've let us play it. In an era where single-player campaigns don't have co-op, a game with co-op should be praised for having the option at all. I disagree.
Not if it's not done well.
If the game offers co-op, but the co-op sucks ass and is boring, and we're just walking around listening to wet meat being slapped on pavement for 15-20 minutes at a time without getting to shoot things, it shouldn't be praised.
Yeah, it's basically a participation ribbon at that point. And the problem with that, and I understand where you're coming from, and like it's one of the things I appreciate what they're trying to do. But what happens is if you're going to do something like that and you don't do it well, you can kill those features for an industry. Because if you make a game that doesn't sell well or doesn't do well, the other industry like leaders and stuff like that will see that and say, well, okay, co-op multiplayer does not work. Everyone hates it. We're not going to make it. So if you're going to do things like that, you have to make sure to do them well, or people aren't going to make them in the future. It's the same thing that happens, with a bunch of other genres and stuff that try to be too many things at once. And then all of a sudden the experience is kind of half-baked. People don't enjoy it. And then, no sequels get made. And other studios aren't going to take on that idea because they don't want to take that risk.
Yeah, big companies don't like to take risk. You'll see it over and over and over again. All the innovation in games always comes from the small game companies. Then they've made their innovative game. Their innovative game becomes popular. Everybody starts buying their innovative game, giving them money. Now they can't change that game. They can't.
Anything because the company relies on has to be 5 to 10% new stuff. Because that's how it sells. That's how you sell video games. You change 5 to 10% on a successful formula.
And typically when you see those big games changing, they're just incorporating features of the latest, most popular game. Which is why after Gears of War became so popular, everything turned into a cover shooter.
And when PUBG became so popular, everything became a battle royale.
Yep. So that's what Pseudo's talking about there. If a big company does co-op multiplayer and they do it ass and it sells for shit and it kills that series, like if it killed Halo, which it definitely didn't help Halo, and it barely sold on Halo name, so that's going to have a negative impact on all your co-op multiplayers.
Yeah, like
everyone
there was definitely. Yeah, because like Halo was one of the original ones that started doing like the co-op campaigns, and they started doing them really well. Like Halo 1 is fantastic, and 2, and really enjoyed 3. And when 3 was, we beat 3 together, and that was a grand time.
3 was super fun.
3 was our favorite.
I loved 3.
Our main problem with ODST's campaign is not so much that it is there; it's just that the direction they tried to take with it, where it was more serious and slow paced, just does not translate to co-op very well, unless you give mechanics for it. There was no objectives. There was no reason for this. The theme and the feeling of the game for single player does not translate to having 3 other people. You know, you don't feel as tense, you know, like when you're playing solo legendary, you are going to get messed up. You do have to be careful. You do have to sneak, but now you have, you know, a squad of people. You're no longer really like in that much danger, which was our problem with it. It's not so much that it had co-op. It's just that the single player experience was designed for a reason. And it's like, I could say, you know, it's done well. It's done better than, of course, the multiplayer was, but since they wanted to add multiplayer into it, like there's a lot of stuff they should have done rather than just, you know, saying, here's multiplayer. Because that was kind of just what happened. They could have added multiplayer. I'm not saying they shouldn't. It's just that since they were doing that, you know, they should have designed it to be multiplayer rather than just having it kind of be that afterthought of being single player first.
Yeah. Well, Doom 2016, depending on how good the person you're playing with is, on highest difficulty, would still be terrifying.
Sorry.
Like,
but, you know, but that's exactly what we're talking about, right? We're talking about games with a strong single player focus and a campaign that works in single player probably shouldn't have co-op. Doom 2016 doesn't have co-op.
My biggest complaint, I think, about the co-op experience in ODST is that if you literally just cut out those boring walking around the city sections that were supposed to be stealth sections apparently, and compressed it down to just the intense action segments, it's a better experience. The game becomes better just by removing those pieces and letting us play the rest as a multiplayer campaign. So if they wanted to give us the multiplayer campaign, they could have just not made us do those parts and let us do the action parts, and who cares how much sense it makes because you're playing with a bunch of buddies and we just had fun. And we would have been saying wonderful things about it right now.
Yeah, or, I mean, like even so here's an idea, and I think this is actually a good one. Single player, you play as the rookie and you're doing all of the surface stuff, and you're figuring out that all the past that has gone on, what happened to your crewmates, what have you. And then for multiplayer, like Deus is suggesting, you just avoid that entirely, and you get introduced as the squad members that died, and you just play as them.
An interesting idea for a multiplayer game. Okay. One person controls the body, okay, in the world, and everybody has their own objectives that they have to complete in the world, and if you don't have control of the body, you're one of the personalities in his brain fighting for control of the body.
Oh, God.
So everybody else is doing like little skill-based mini games trying to get control of the body while the body's wandering around on the surface.
Yes.
Oh, no. That definitely would have been controversial.
Octodad, but you're each a limb.
Yeah. You might as well just make a mech where everyone just controls a limb, and then one.
Oh, you could just be Voltron.
Yeah, just just walking around as a squad. But yeah, like there's
that would actually be great. I would love that.
But basically, what's boiling down is like they kind of split between single player and co-op, and like which is. I feel like the energy they put into the single player experience, if they wanted it to be that serious, you know, it should have just stayed as that single player campaign, or maybe, you know, co-op with just 2 people, and because you can lock that down a bit more rather than having the 4. And then, you know, keeping multiplayer to firefight or something like that, or, you know, maybe just not having single player and really trying to lock down the 4-player mechanics, because it's hard to design a campaign that's going to work for both. And that's kind of like the main drawback of this game. And like, yeah, the single player can be fine. The main, like, our issue with it, and like when we're doing, you know, what's wrong with the game and how can we improve it, we're not saying that everything about the game is wrong. It's just there's a notable thing about it.
Yeah.
And, you know, how could it be improved? And what is wrong with ODST was that it's co-op multiplayer fell flat, and it was something they, you know, advertised quite a bit as, hey, you're going to be able to play with, you know, 4 people and be able to experience all this, you know, this the narrative we were doing. And you go through it and it's kind of like what's going on? Like, we're walking like right out of the gate. The pacing is just, you stop and they're like, all right, let's go through all your menus that you're never going to use again. I don't really think I ever really used that map.
Yeah, no.
We just
I did when we got lost once.
we kind of just like wandered, and like the initial pacing is, oh, we're gonna have to take our time. There isn't intense music playing. There was like a little bit of a firefight, but that's it. Whereas you'll notice with other Halo games, they kind of start you off right in the shit. Like your ship's getting blown up, you're getting raided like 90% of the time, and you in that action all the time, and that sets the pace of this is going to be an action game where you're fighting endless enemies. So right out of the gate, we knew it was going to be slower, but then like it was just too slow. There was no mechanics that complemented that experience.
Straight up, I forgot there was a map function. I didn't even remember that existed, because I don't think I used it once. I don't think I used it once. Of course, I'm pretty famous for forgetting my abilities. Damn you, Dead Space.
Yeah. I mean, it did have a lot of promise. Like, honestly, they could have made that campaign really tense, even for multiplayer. It would have been really difficult to scale it down to work on single player, but they could have made it very tense for a multiplayer experience, like the roving death squads that maybe you can't even kill them. Maybe all you can do is slow them down.
They needed to scale
get
up
to your next point.
Number of squads based on players.
Yeah, but then that gets, I guess, difficult too for hardware limitations and stuff at the time. So maybe they had to design around that. But like they could have had the wraiths maybe patrolling, and maybe they spot you with a spotlight, and then they just start unloading at you.
Here's the thing. We did combat sections in 4-player with lots of things for us to shoot in that game between those sections. So there is nothing stopping them from having more squads. They're clearly capable of doing it. They've done it before.
Yeah. Well, those sections were usually the defending ones, right? So you're locked down in an area, not running around. It's probably just when it's an open map. It's probably, if you have too many separated, spread across the whole level, that can get quite heavy computationally if you're trying to calculate pathing for all those things. But yeah, I mean, they couldn't have just left it, right? There's not really an excuse just to leave it. If there's limitations, you find ways around them, and you find mechanics that'll work for it, right? Like they could have just made them stronger, make us weaker. Maybe we have less ammo and we have to be more careful, or maybe we have to be a bit more defensive, have them come to us and set up like defenses and stuff like that. It was just weird. It felt weird. We've played quite a bit now. I don't know if there's any too much we would want to improve on. If we want to like start maybe nitpicking like vehicles and weapons, or maybe like level design. But I think we kind of beat the co-op to death.
The level design definitely could use. The combat areas was fine, but the open cities were just kind of walking along dark roads,
just empty. Yeah, I don't know that we've come up with enough suggestions for things to change with the co-op, because the co-op, like the way that it scaled was horrific. It really was. So we've come up with 1 or 2 ideas for actually fixing that. And I think they're both sort of in the same vein of either just don't do the city sections, or have roving death squads. I think there's other options, like having objectives you actually have to complete in the city, and maybe just like a couple more enemies, giving you a little bit more something to do. Maybe your squad has to split up and go, power on some generators or something, like give you something to do in the city rather than just walking around and not really doing anything.
Yeah, like they could be, maybe you have to turn on generators, and then maybe they get attacked, and then you have to send some people to defend them, and maybe there's some other stuff getting attacked at the same time, so now you have to like split. 2 people go defend one thing, 2 people go defend another thing. That at least would have been nice. Splitting the people up into smaller groups allows you to have, the smaller squads and still have them be a threat. it's one of those things that comes back to also like it has to be a separate experience then too from just cloning single player to add these mechanics, which they definitely should have done.
I'm not sure I agree with that. You can scale those mechanics. Warframe does it really, really well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess I was thinking like simultaneous defense, but that doesn't also have to be an option if it's just one player. They just have to go defend things.
Yeah.
You defend one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But like you
Rift did it
seed
very
a bunch
well,
of
too.
different areas. You seed a bunch of different areas to be defense stations. And then if you're playing in multiplayer, you can spawn up to 4 of them at a time, depending on difficulty, depending on number of players. And then you've now got all of these different points that people go, oh shit, I've got to get over there. I've got to defend this thing.
That would
It's totally doable.
You could do 2 spawns sometimes with 4 players, have them be larger ones, and have people be forced to work together to clear out areas or forced to split up to defend points, kind of idea. I mean, how do you rewrite the narrative as well at that point? Because isn't it kind of like after the battle, or is this just like running into? I guess the running into would be more like the roaming death squads if it was just.
If you were just to encounter things, it would basically be the roaming death squads.
Yeah.
But if you've got, say, an objective you need to complete in an area and like just pull a leaf straight out of Left 4 Dead's book and say, you start the generator, but that lets everybody in the area know you're there, spawns, a couple of rounds of dudes while you're trying to get this door open or whatever. Just have that in there. Have a little mini Left 4 Dead.
Yeah, I guess if there's some event causing a loud sound, more war-based, there's destruction and stuff usually left over after a war, which we really didn't see in the city either. It could use a lot more destruction and like signs of battle, because it looked just like an empty
there really
city.
Weren't any.
and at that point you can have, say, a building rubble blocking your way that needs to be blasted and cleared, but blasting and clearing it alerts all the rest of the enemies left over in the area that are still looking for survivors to come and clear you guys out. And that creates exactly what you're talking about there for the defense sections. And then you start knowing, hey, when we create, just do it as a mechanic. When we create sound, it attracts enemies. Don't do it as a major alert on the map that you have to go to that point, but players split up and, we found this thing, we need to blast it. You need to get everybody over there in order to defend it, because you know that there's going to be shit going down when you do it. Condition the player that way.
The guy with the bomb.
Yeah, that too.
I mean, if you're a gamer, you game the system, just sack the guy with the bomb, he'll respawn, it'll be fine.
You know what I think this game is missing, though? Time limits.
Legitimately, yes.
Get out.
Unironically, yes.
Get out. You're not allowed in here anymore. You must leave, sir.
If there's defending things, though, they could have been used there. I was mostly joking at first too, but they could have been used at some points. Right? If you want to do tension with multiple people and you don't want to do it through just that difficulty, you can use. It doesn't also have to be just an actual time limit. It could also just be health. You're defending a structure and it's taking damage. The longer it takes you to clear out the enemies, the more damage it'll be taking. Some sort of pressure. Right? We were never really rushed too much. And that's one thing where if you want tension in multiplayer games, you have to drive the player forward. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of great ways to do that. If you have especially kind of like open worldish things, you need, some sort of consequence for dicking around. And you don't want to punish them too much because you still want them to have fun. Yep. But you want to have to be like, okay, guys, like, yeah, a couple of minutes of, farting around, but there's a war to fight kind of thing, right? So some mechanics around that probably would have been good, because there's nothing stopping us from just getting lost forever. And like, it's also in the player's best interest to, not just be stuck somewhere without anything going on.
I think better than the time limit, which I'm such a big fan of. I just love time limits so much. I like the roaming death squad idea more than that, where just have a hidden spawn timer, and the longer you take, the more of them spawn.
Yep.
So that eventually you're just going to hit critical mass and you're not going to be able to kill them and they're going to overwhelm you and you've got to get moving.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of in-your-face countdown timers. I'm a fan of the hidden timers.
Yeah.
For like enrage timers or just like the pseudo timers. Like a lot of times in games when you're doing a defense thing and there's like a health bar, a lot of times that's not actually a thing taking damage. It's usually a scripted amount of time for that damage to take. You'll find that you'll fail around the same amount of time. And that's how these things work because they need to keep it consistent. If it was just, defend this person or defend this thing, you could, it could be variant, all of a sudden for some reason the AI just kills it right away or it's harder. So a lot of the times they'll just kind of script it. Well, if it's taking damage from enemies, of course it'll take more, but it's also just scripted. If you're just taking your time, you'll just notice the health will start skipping forward and dropping forward. And I like the idea of, you need to stop them or more and more show up and you need to complete your objectives because, your enemy is getting stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about being arbitrary or not. Basically, right? If we just throw up an arbitrary timer like complete it in this time, then they're offensive. But if it's here's some fuel, do it before you run out, then it's understandable. It's not a time limit anymore. It's a real world problem. I've got fuel.
Yeah, it needs to be at least immersive as well as the player needs control over it. So, if it's fuel, the player can, have some sort of aspect of how much fuel is either burning or have the ability to refuel. They need the ability to, control either the pace of the time depleting or, be able to control how much time they have left. And that's one thing you'll find with time limits. And that's why a lot of people hate them is because if you don't have control over just seconds ticking down, it's just you're going to hit a point where all you're thinking about is, okay, well, I was 10 seconds faster than my last attempt. So there's no point now because I know I'm not going to make it. I might as well just quit. And that's just, not a good feeling for the player. It doesn't make sense immersion wise. It immediately breaks the experience because you're still in the game and now you have to hit menu and restart. So a big thing too is just having that control and being able to, maybe if you're not fast enough, the player can make up for it with being, a more accurate shot or being able to strategize.
Yep. Yeah. I don't want to touch on that too much because in 2 weeks' time we're doing another Everything Wrong With and How to Fix It with AC, and I have lots to say about time limits in that one. So what was the other one?
Pseudo timers or hidden timers.
Which was hidden timer.
For to drive the player forward, so like stronger enemies.
Hidden timer to drive the player forward. Plays well with death squads. Will you have Core? If he'll come on the show, I would love to have Core on.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to have a guest.
Knowledgeable and insightful and just a genuinely great human being. And I like talking with him.
Need to grab my phone charger just 1 second.
Alrighty. So how else could we improve? I want an idea from the chat. And we haven't had an idea from you guys. How can we actually improve the city sections without just removing them?
My lights just flickered when I plugged that in. That's probably not a good sign.
That's concerning.
Oh boy. Okay. Just not gonna worry about that.
Having a Covenant ship slowly glassing the city behind you. Interesting.
Oh, yeah, no, we're talking Ace Combat. Sorry, awful, not Assassin's Creed. I don't play Assassin's Creed. I don't touch Ubisoft. Ubisoft is on
collectible. That wouldn't be an improvement board.
Yeah, Ubisoft is on our developer shit list, which I should probably add to the website. That's a nice thing to keep track of. Also, our indie developers to watch.
Yeah, those would both be good things to have on there.
Maybe. You can pick them, and if I refuse to pay money for them, I'll just refund your points.
If we could get like Prince of Persia, the second one, that game's pretty good.
I use the Epic Game Store. I just don't put money into it. I get all their free games because free games are free.
Don't look a gift game in the mouth?
Yep.
Question mark?
Yep. That's how I played Subnautica. Got that for free. And you cost them bandwidth. They don't pay much for that.
No. With their Fortnite money, they don't need to worry about bandwidth costs.
Or they make up for that with
here we go.
The inflating their user numbers, and then also just the data they have.
Yeah, the data from what games you look at is probably worth more than the bandwidth.
Well, they get your tracking IDs and everything, all that fun stuff too when you go to their store. So they get your whole user profile.
They still make money when I get their game for free. There's a deal there. Epic pays them. Yep, that's how they're doing it. They're footing the cost of all the free games in order to get people onto their platform.
Which is actually a very fair way to do it for the developers.
Big agree. And it's also the best way to get all these developers to agree to giving away games. Well, I'm boycotting them. They're trying to bring the console exclusivity shit to PC. We could do a whole other topic on that, but that's not what they're doing. But we've talked about this many times. Let's do actual Halo 3 for the last half an hour of this short panel. That's literally just to combat the existing monopoly. That's all that's for, but we'll leave it at that.
We'll talk about this at a separate time, but that's terrible. I hate that so much.
I don't agree with it, but I see why they're doing it. I don't know how you fix the city part. See, that's why mine, which is the first one I put up, was just literally don't do them. Like, think back to that Howling God when we did it, and just take out the city parts and only have the other, like, shooting stuff multiplayer parts, and it would have been a lot of fun.
It would have been super short.
It would have been super short, but it would have been fun.
Totally fine.
Yeah, it would have been short fun. It was a cheap game.
You've got a cheap game with a add-on multiplayer component for the campaign. It doesn't have to be the full experience of the single player campaign. I can't for the life of me remember this game, but I have played other multiplayer games that have a multiplayer campaign that just cut out some of the very single player, like, set PC tense moments to have a fun multiplayer. Or do it like Portal 2. Just have a different campaign.
Yep. That's one of my biggest pet peeves in a game, Awful. That's one of the things that irked me the most about this game, is that removing parts of it just flat out makes it better. That means that people did work to make the game worse.
And I mean, I can probably talk for half an hour on my own about contributing negative work to an environment.
It could have been better with less effort. Come on, guys, put some effort into your design.
I think that city could have had, like, personality as well.
Yeah. Like I said, it was signs of wreckage, signs of war. It didn't look like a war happened there.
Not even just that, but just like culture, have some sort of culture, some sort of, things to care about. Maybe, stories of people you can find, or just some sort of, it was just buildings. There was no sort of, unique art style associated with them. There was no districts. There was no, like, this is a downtown and this is like a residential. It was just like streets and the same kind of generic building over and over again. There could have been, you take a book out of Disney, because this is something Disney does very well with their theme parks, is they tell stories with just the environments, nothing, like, without words. Like, say you go to, the pirate world, every single thing in that environment is going to have something to do with pirates and communicate pirates, and you'll be able to kind of build a background of what's going on. This was just a city, and there was some stuff around, but, like, there was no personality, there was no culture. You don't know what's really kind of going on there. You don't really care because there's nothing really going on there. There could have been, something they could have had. If they wanted it to be dark, they could have had dark things, like you go to a hospital and the Covenant, killed everyone inside the hospital, so you can get upset. At least there's some different buildings or something, right? You could have, like a downtown shopping area. You could have had, a suburb. Right? There's stuff that could have been done. It was just kind of a city, and it's like, well, what's in the city? And it's like, oh, it's a city. Well, what's special about it? It's like, oh, there's people. Well, what happened to them? I don't know. I guess they died.
It's basically just a procedurally generated city, is what you're saying.
Yeah, without the procedure.
I don't know if they procedurally generated it or not, but it is basically just like the same thing you would get from a procedurally generated city. There's no curation to it. There's no human touch. There's no art to it. There's no logic to it other than just put structures next to each other and lay roads between them. Like I can't name a single building. I can't remember a single thing about any of the cities other than just roads without cars or people. Just empty.
Wholly uninteresting.
Yeah, like I said, even adding some sort of landmark that at least would have resonated with players or got it recognized with players. Like you can do schools, you can do hospitals, you can do
statues of Master Chief.
A stadium, defending a stadium. Like I'm sure there was some stuff there, but none of it was like stuff that you would really. And nothing stuck out, right? It was all just kind of generic. It was just made, and maybe they didn't have time to add that. But for improvements, that's something that adds flavor to these areas.
Dragon Age 2. I didn't play Dragon Age 2. I couldn't do it. Loved the first one. Couldn't do the second one. Just no. City is just copy pasted over and over.
Brutal.
Yeah, it's definitely felt that way. And like the other levels weren't too bad either. Like some of them were actually designed. You had paths to go down, and they were kind of intriguing. Like what's going on here, and it's just that opening one it leaves such a bad taste in your mouth. It's hard to take the rest of the game seriously. If it's like the first level, that should be, like you should put a lot of effort into that.
Yes.
The first, like the beginning and the end. The middle, you can get a bit lazy and sloppy if you are on, budgets and time crunch, because, the players would be a bit more forgiving. If you start off strong, they will carry through those parts. And even the best games of all time still have, a kind of not fantastic mid game, but you need to make sure to also, have the end game content and the finale of it, something that, will stay and be a positive experience. Because if you don't do that, then you get, like Game of Thrones kind of stuff where the ending is just so bad, it's just going to ruin the entire experience anyways.
Yeah, but you get what I'm saying, Awful. Like, there's things you can put in that would identify it as even the Halo universe. There's an interesting point and an interesting way to look at it. If we were to take just the city without the enemies and fly a camera through it, you would not be able to identify what universe that city is from.
They could have added like ODST propaganda and stuff like that. They could have had, culture, just something that resembled civilization more than just buildings.
A car dealership with civilian warthogs in it.
Yeah, something like that would be amazing.
Is the Hummer of that universe.
Yeah, and then we can jump in it and drive it around even with no guns on it. It doesn't ruin anything. It just lets us play with our favorite thing in the game. But yeah, no, like Sudo was saying, even just posters on the wall for ODST. Or war propaganda put up. Anything just to make them sound like the good guys in the war. I think they are anyway, but that's what you have going on. You have to have public support in your war. It should be all over the city. You can't tell a war's going on. You can't tell a war has been there. You can't tell that there's enemies there. And if you take everything out of it and fly a camera through it, nobody could ever tell you it's a Halo city. Because there's nothing to identify what or where it is. Just looks like some generic postmodern city.
But as far as the actual Halo gameplay sections, they were okay.
It was Halo.
Like
it was Halo.
The most fun I remember having, well, they weren't Halo 3. Let me tell you what. But the most fun I remember having was getting airborne vehicles. And that's a bug.
And you know, this isn't just complaints about specific Halo 3 ODST. If it's a complaint of Halo 3 ODST and the rest of the series, it's a valid thing to bring up. And when we do everything wrong with, as Suda was saying before, it's not that we hate the game. In this case, we weren't fans of the game. But we also did an everything wrong with for Resident Evil 2 Remake, which we loved.
Oh, we loved that.
We loved that
was really
game.
good.
But it had its issues. And it's important to be able to recognize, even if you love a game, what its weak points and its issues are, to be able to analyze them and make it better next time. And
that being said about the other Halo games, that they should have improved that too. That's not an excuse. Like, that's still a critique.
Yeah,
that's a thing with other Halo games as well. When you walk around a lot of city stuff, the cities never really have culture. The alien stuff has culture. Yep. You can tell that you're in alien areas and there's hints of Covenant. It's just what's going on. And we can look at it from a dev's point of view, but we're also looking at it from a game designer point of view. And sure, they had limitations, but the point of this isn't so much, dunk on the devs for, being under time crunch and not having budgets. It's just saying how, with, more resources and more time, what should have been done differently and how could this have been done differently? We're not trying to talk down and say the devs are bad in any sort of way. It's just saying, it's more of an analysis and of like, okay, what could have been improved? Should we do this again for, in the future, for future designers and future developers to use?
We are devs, and that is why we are so pedantic even.
Yeah. Turns out being a developer, you end up being real pedantic. Words are important.
So unfortunately, the quickest, easiest way to improve the city sections is to just not have them in the multiplayer campaign.
Oh, insulting? We didn't mean to insult anyone. We apologize if we did.
Like I said, we're not trying to dunk on the devs. Like, there's criticisms, but you can't take criticism personally. And like, it sucks at times. Like, a lot of my projects, they're not fantastic, and I'll never make anything up to the level that these people have. But as part of the community, we can still bring up these concerns and bring up these criticisms and say, hey, these are our opinions and how these things should have been done better. We're not saying they're bad. We're not saying you guys did a terrible job, you never knew better. It's just like, these are things that, we think could have been done differently. I'm sure they had reasons for doing them. I'm sure they weren't intentionally trying to, make the game the way it was. And I'm sure maybe some of them realized it when it was happening. And anyone who's worked on a year-long product will know that, halfway through, you're going to realize like, well, we're only going to be able to do 20% of the things we scoped. And now we have to start cutting stuff. And it's not a good feeling. And
there's just so many different names and opinions and requirements and needs involved in a project of that size that things get cut as you go.
And another problem that happens too is when people enjoy these kind of games, like when people enjoy games in general, and like a lot of my favorite games are actually a lot of people's least favorite games, and it took me a long time to be able to disassociate criticisms for people hating on things online and me not taking it personally. And I can like games that are bad, and it doesn't mean that my taste is bad or I'm bad or my opinions are wrong. I have to be able to, view that from an analysis point of view and saying, this is just how it is. It can still be fun. There's like, this game can still be fun for a lot of people. We still played the whole thing, and a lot of fun was just because we're buddies and we're messing around and stuff. But it's still providing us an experience that we went through, and it's just like an improvement. We're not, like I said, we're not dunking on them. We're not. Our intention isn't to be insulting and put ourselves above anyone else. It's just these are our opinions on how things could be improved, and it's unfortunate. Some people attach themselves to a game, and as soon as there's any criticisms, they'll take it personally and think that we're attacking them and attacking their likes, and that's not the case at all. Like, Some of my favorite games of all time, like I really enjoy the Fallout series, and a lot of people don't like those. I really enjoyed playing the later versions of WoW, which I know a lot of people don't like either, and I can attest that.
That's a controversial opinion.
And I'm not saying that they're good games. It's just I liked playing them, and that's the thing. People have different tastes, and the same thing with movies. I watch a lot of B movies. I intentionally watch some of the worst movies I can find. Doesn't mean I can't say they're bad and analyze points that could have made them good.
I love terrible movies.
It's the same thing of watching, like, you can watch like an old horror movie and analyze, like, okay, well, this is terrible, and certain things do that intentionally, but you can still view improvements, and it's not like we're going to mock the people who made it.
And actually, I praise most of them, but yeah.
Gord says he likes Skyrim despite its many flaws, and that's exactly what we're talking about. Like, in my opinion, Doom Eternal and Doom 2016 are two of the best games to have come out in the last decade. I don't think they should have had a multiplayer component. Straight up. Shouldn't have existed. It was bad. Shouldn't have done it. But they did. And there are people who play those games multiplayer, and they enjoy them quite a lot.
Playing as the demons.
I mean that's a pretty cool gimmick, but if you're up against the Doomslayer, you're gonna die.
Yeah, it was interesting, but man, we really didn't come up with a lot of ways to improve those city sections. We got mostly sidetracked. Maybe that's why they are the way they are.
That's what happened, because they got sidetracked working on the action sections. Because the action sections were fine. There was nothing wrong with them.
Yeah,
I
really
really enjoyed
competent Halo.
the defense ones. We had all the rockets and the lasers, or just like the detachable turrets. Like that was fun as hell. A lot of stuff to just shoot and blow up.
Although I do wish that they had accounted for Pythagorean theorem when you're walking with the turrets.
That was hilarious. I'm going fast now.
I'm glad they didn't.
I definitely would have used it if I was slow, because the whole point of that is like, oh, it's a big burly weapon, but you move slow. I'm like, not if I move at a 45-degree angle.
Not if I am a crab.
I can walk forward and sideways at the same time. It's peak performance.
Crab turret. Walk like crab, shoot like turret. Yes.
Very effective.
That was the best part of the game. Right there. I've added something
really
to this list of
too.
I've added something to the list of games. I see it in there. It's in there. It's in the draw.
Oh my.
There is a chance of precipitation in the rewards. A chance of precipitation.
Ooh. That's a good game.
Oh, yeah, right there. Excellent.
So do we feel like there's any work that could have been done on the non-city sections of the game?
I'm honestly super happy with those sections. I don't feel they need a lot of changing, or I think they were great fun. I was super excited although it could be a little bit of rose tinted glasses, just because every time we were in the city section we were also like, please end.
Yeah. But our expectations, I think if we even cut out the city and just play those other levels, we probably would have enjoyed them more, because I kind of had a bad taste in my mouth for like that first experience, right? And we probably would have taken them a bit more seriously.
Mm-hmm. I think also they suffered a little bit from trying to do a more open style level design. Maybe it was because they were getting better at optimizing what the console generation could do, but I found like they seem to have a lot of empty large areas with relatively low poly structures in them, just to be like, look how big we can make a map.
You think they were doing that because for map size? I guess they weren't.
Maybe.
They probably weren't great at lazy loading and stuff like that. Yeah. What game is that? What system is that on?
Was it? It was 360, right?
Yeah, that would have been 360.
Yeah.
That's pre-installing to the drive and everything, so it was all loading off of disk still. So you can't really do lazy loading. How much memory did it have?
Not enough.
We've
Yeah.
had lazy loading since PS1.
Really?
Yeah,
So that's
Crash
really
Bandicoot.
lazy loading.
Crash Bandicoot did that. It loaded the levels as you played them.
Props to Crash Bandicoot, yeah.
Yeah, but the game has to be, of course, designed around that because it is, you can only load so much at a time.
Yeah, that's really lazy loading, as I was saying. That's CD speed lazy loading.
A lot of elevators.
Yeah. Lots of ladders.
From a personal standpoint, I honestly would prefer that they had been more corridor bound.
It's weird because the later levels end up being like that. Like the highway levels and stuff like that, they stopped being so open world. They just became linear, and then they started becoming a bit more fun. And even the other ones, they were all fairly still linear. It was just an open city of like you have two paths to go, one with enemies, one without enemies.
Good luck.